Hi there. Welcome to my TED Talk about sports psychology and gaming. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up playing mentally demanding sports like swimming, soccer, and everything else you can possibly think of. And my mom made sure that I would be well-rounded when I grew up. My discipline and mentality have been refined to a point where I find it truly hard to be anxious about anything competitive. Sometimes to the point of being carefree, which had its benefits when I went to go play esports professionally. Sports psychology is something that only started intriguing me recently after I got into professional coaching for Valorant players. And for the uninformed, it's a tactical first-person shooter, which two teams of five play games which are determined by rounds. Before, I never really saw how other people truly thought through the game until I started talking to my players and kind of figuring out how people considered the game. And I often compare the thinking of how the rounds play out to war strategies because that's how in-depth it goes, especially at the highest level. Every single game has multiple millisecond split decisions where multiple hundreds of scenarios occur and players have to adapt in real time. And dozens of rounds play down to 0.01 of a second. For individual players, they all had the physical ability, referred to as mechanics, to perform at the highest level, but there would always be something mentally holding them back. A lot of the times it was simply a confidence thing, their self-efficacy, which is an individual's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situation, is often damaged when they perform below their own standards, making it hard for them to perform due to a fear of failure, which leads to a more severe problem, overthinking, and hyperfixation of things that are similarly irrelevant to the holistic problem, and they believe these small, minute things down to the way that their fingertips rest on the mouse, the angle of their monitor, and a million other details that ultimately just slow them down. And with three major factors that make up the kind of triangle skill, or skill triangle I like to say, is mechanics, which is how the player moves their character and their mouse in game, and game sense, how a player strategically approaches the game, and finally what I would argue is the most important, mentality, which is where I personally see the most problems. And once I started looking into this problem, I began reading books like The Inner Game of Tennis and Blink, which are both sports psychology books, because I thought they would be pretty relevant here, which both heavily encourage performing based on instinct and letting the subconscious mind take over rather than trying to fully take control of every little detail. One of my favorite concepts that I started teaching my students was the idea of self 1 and self 2, which is from The Inner Game of Tennis and their relationship to performance. It suggests that there is a self 1, the conscious mind, which judges and tries to control, and a self 2, which is the unconscious mind, which performs effortlessly. It focuses on understanding how these two minds interact and how to minimize the self-interference of self 1 to tap into the natural abilities of self 2. Ultimately, it explores the ideas of relaxed concentration and letting go of the mental interference to achieve peak performance. But how does that apply to a video game, you may ask? Going back to my idea of the player's self-efficacy being damaged and them tending to let self 1 take over instead of letting self 2 just take the reins, using the example given by Galloway, imagine trying to perfect a perfect stroke in tennis. And while doing it, you think about how the elbow moves, the angle of your arm, how your wrist is going to flick at the end of it, or if it's not, and a million other things. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But it's how these players have tried to approach the game forever, and by hyperfixating on a single thing, they end up worse than they were before sometimes. In Galloway's coaching experience, he actually found that less specific feedback and simply showing them the action was far more effective than trying to break down the stroke into a billion pieces, and would allow even the most amateur players to see immediate results. Which just goes to show that there is a conflict between conscious and unconscious mind, which is incredibly important in competitive spaces. I also began to look into game theory, which analyzes interactive decision-making where the outcome for each player depends on the actions of all, and that kind of works into this team-based game because a lot of what you do has to come from the impact of other players who are on your team, especially being a 5-player team game. If you guys are not on the same page, it kind of goes a little haywire sometimes. And applying this idea of conscious and unconscious mind to a Valorant, one of my players, who goes by Flash, who since working with him has hit top 100 in North America and has gotten offers from major organizations like Talent and Shopify Rebellion, which are tier 2 teams, but they're pretty respectable in the scene. And when I initially met and reviewed his gameplay, it was no question that he was mechanically gifted and had insane game sense. So he was a really good player, and he was really intrinsically motivated. He would practice for 10 hours a day, even pushing past his own burnout because he wanted to succeed. But when he struggled in-game, he struggled. Like to the point where he looked like he was starting. And it reflected in his stats. In tournaments where he would play well, it was often because he had an incredible first couple of rounds. But if he made the smallest minor mistakes in the beginning, he would beat himself for the rest of the tournament. It was clear, looking in the replays of games, that there was a clear mental shift when he was disappointed with him. and he would constantly start apologizing for even the smallest things, even if it really didn't have that large of an impact on the game, or if they had actually won the round. And other than apologies, he would just go quiet. Something that is devastating in a game which relies on teamwork and coordination. So I started to tell him just to think less. Crazy when you think about it, but I formally told him just to focus on his role and just visualize what he wanted to do as a whole rather than focusing on all those little details. Of course, just telling someone to blindly trust himself when they didn't in the first place isn't going to work initially. But slowly but surely, he started to get more comfortable with having his bad rounds, and his stats started going up over time. His communication got more clear and concise, and he slowly became more confident. Not to say that just thinking less is some sort of magical advice that you can make you an insane or talented player, but he already had the mechanics and was physically and mentally able to perform at the levels that was expected of him and of himself. But the emphasis here is that a simple shift in his mentality was able to have incredible results in not only his self-determination to challenge himself to be better, which just overall made him seem more enjoyable and happy to be around, which is something that's very vital in a team-based game. Almost like having fun was the main reason most of people started playing Valorant. I want to say that by reducing his cognitive load and just having him simplify things helped him immensely, but there were probably other things that he did to contribute to himself that were not mental. And I coach other details of this, of course, like his mechanics, and kind of how he performed and made decisions in the game. So things other than mental. Now that I understood that that worked, I wanted to explore why that worked. Because Flash was a clear example that it did work, but I wanted to know why. So I explored other parts of psychology, specifically those having to do with the unconscious mind. And I discovered rapid cognition, which is more often referred to thin slicing in Blink, which in his own words is the ability of the unconscious mind to make quick, accurate judgments about situations or people based on the very limited information on using previous experiences. There was a story of a Kora statue, which is just a very old statue, that the Getty Museum was considering purchasing. And the statue was initially thought to be authentic after extensive testing, but a few experts had a strong intuitive feeling that it wasn't right, leading them to reconsider their purchase and keep doing research on it. These experts had a strong, unexplainable, intuitive feeling that something wasn't right, and ultimately they ended up being right. It was a fake. So their mistake highlights how our unconscious mind can make rapid judgments that can be just as valid or even more valid than conscious, deliberate decision making. Although we shouldn't apply this to people because it can have a dark side of applying negative stereotypes, prejudice, or discrimination, of course, as we all know. Applying that to Valor, though, where split-second decisions can make or break the outcome of a game, it's pretty clear that a lot of the decisions happen purely out of past experiences within the game, and taps into the unconscious self to make the magic happen. Which brings me to my main point. A lot of people ask me, how do I be consistent? Because it's very common for people to have days where they play well and bad days where they don't. And to answer their question almost every time, I'll say the same simple things to get a schedule. Start eating, balance meals, drink water, and sleep more, which are all extremely important in their own right, but for allowing the body to function properly, especially in a game where reaction time is so vital. But at the end of the day, what I found was the most useful thing was shifting their mentality towards an internal locus of control, where they not only approach with an optimistic mind, but they believe they truly can win no matter, even if they make these small mistakes. But also, it's not entirely their fault when they lose. Being comfortable with failing is the first step for most to ironically not fail, and to be more consistent. Then on top of that, I have them relax with corny but effective breathing exercises that allow them to lower their anxiety and just zone out into what many call the unconscious mind going into a flow state, which refers to a peak state of mind, which I find happens more often than not by simply immersing yourself in the task and stop thinking about the little details. They don't matter as much as your mind being clear and looking at the problem as a whole, rather than pieces. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I've run out of time.